Chapter 827. The external neuron had been very active for the past 2 days. Perhaps the negligible increase in privileges brought about some changes after the confirmation and review process was initiated? Reality proved that Luonan's guess was correct. He could see from the detailed information that the Heaven Stairway Level 4 knowledge access privileges allowed him to carry out the operation of importing external data, complementing and perfecting the offline database. If he confirmed that the data was not available in the main database, he would receive some rewards. It was possible to increase his privilege rating. Of course, this would have to wait until he connected to the so-called Heaven Abyss network and established a link with the main database. Perhaps this function was something like an information hunter? Right now he could only be considered a librarian. Data was easy to deal with, but the matter of connecting to the internet was too far away. Luonan did not hope to rely on it to increase his privileges in the short term. However, the virtual brain system was the basic function of the database. It would also process the imported data, providing analysis, integration, modeling, and other application services. If he was able to experience the big data application technology of the mysterious alien civilization, then this trip would not be a loss. Luonan immediately clicked yes. He wanted to see what the result would be. However, the system immediately refreshed with new information, coldly shattering his wishful thinking. The system is loading external data. It is in in-depth analysis mode. Cannot be interrupted. Non-homologous data will automatically enter the next sequence. Fine, you're the boss. Luonan laughed in spite of himself. He was not in a hurry. But his thoughts turned, and he discovered that some of the characters were quite familiar. It seemed to be the influence of the offline test. The external neuron seemed to be far from being able to completely absorb the information of the abyss world that he had deposited through the altar's spiderweb. This was his own fault. He had to obediently accept it. Oh, wait a moment. Luonan's mind suddenly bypassed a subtle point. Speaking of which, when he passed the offline test, he had raised the single privilege of knowledge access. Only then could he have the function of importing external data. Before this, the external deity's data system, which was connected to his magical energy, was more or less in a read-only state. Then, during the offline test, he had relied on the information deposited through the altar's spiderweb to pass the test. Wasn't the experience of the instantaneous increase in power equivalent to a cheat sheet? In essence, he had copied the reference answer from the database he controlled. This answer was rooted in the abyss world. Thinking about it this way, the relationship between the abyss world, the external neuron, and Luonan himself was quite subtle. No matter what, the data had to be imported. What Luonan wanted wasn't just to brush the pitiful 100 or so gigabytes of data on the question board. He wanted to dig deeper. Not only did he want to dig up the data in Ban City, but he also wanted to dig up all the major data centers in the world if he had the chance. He wanted to see which was better, the priceless data storage and processing system or the external neuron. Stones from other mountains can be used to improve jade. Luonan had to admit that this idea was quite shameless. However, he still hoped that he could use this method to sort out the information he had accumulated during this period of time and come up with a clearer context. It must be known that Luonan's soul cloak could be found all over the world. It was an extremely high-end data collection system, but it was limited by his own brainpower. It did not possess the ability to conduct in-depth analysis and calculation. He could only rely on the external neuron's built-in applications, such as the assembly interface, to conduct filtering. As the external neuron's built-in database was too high-end and not down to Earth, many of them were not suitable for Earth's existing environment. In particular, the processing capabilities were seriously unmatched, and most of the plans given were impractical. Under these circumstances, Luonan urgently wanted to know what the result would be if he were to combine the virtual brain system with Earth's real data, as well as the precipitated information from the abyss world. But it was useless for him to be anxious right now. He could only obediently line up. Mr. Mo, what do you think? This place. Not bad. Most of Luonan's thoughts had shifted to the virtual brain system. He didn't pay much attention to Wu Li's explanation of the reality plane. But after 3 rounds of grinding, Wu Li, this clever devil, had basically grasped Luonan's context. He had more or less calculated the corresponding premium. The workshop introduced this time was already very close to Luonan's needs. Luonan had more or less understood this point before he got off the car. He had come to find the veteran today. He wanted to find a suitable workshop to research the lamination interference technique and the corresponding creation techniques. This was indeed one of the most important reasons. But there was another reason. He wanted to go a step further in communicating with the veteran. He wanted to establish a natural and close relationship with this former vagrant of the wilderness who seemed to be old friends with his father, mother, and grandfather. The current trend was pretty good, but there was still a lot of room for improvement. Therefore, Luonan didn't focus the conversation on the workshop. Instead, he waved the question board in his hand. I just looked at it. The self-created questions on it have very solid fundamentals. Some of the ideas are quite brilliant. If these are able to represent the true level of the technicians under Master Show, then it's quite decent. Of course. If it weren't for Master teaching us to keep a low profile, then it wouldn't be a problem for us to dominate the rankings. Wu Li could already see the intent of cooperation in the veteran's heart after getting along for so long. He advocated with even more vigor, making it easier for him to take the initiative in future negotiations. Luonan just smiled. He didn't respond to Wu Li's words at all. He just said to the veteran, I've only skimmed through the external question bank of Ban City. It seems that the regional characteristics are quite strong. I've also seen the feasibility study report that Secretary Yin gave me. In the area surrounding Ban City, the manufacturing and processing of mutant materials, even if it's high-end products, are basically made from the surrounding marine mutant species. The coverage is a bit smaller. It should be due to the limitations of raw materials. It could be said that Mr. Amo is an expert. The veteran glared at Wu Li and grinned. He made a circle with his thumb and index finger. Frogs at the bottom of a well can only see the sky this big. These kids think that they're awesome just by pondering a few products. I hope you don't mind my words, Mr. Amo. Luonan really didn't mind. He laughed and said, It's nothing. The veteran's words were followed by words. He also added gold to his kids. But it's just like you said, Mr. Amo. Their fundamentals are quite solid. They're also much younger than me. They accept new things very quickly. The business in T-City actually has quite a bit of commonality. Luonan shook his head. It's not like that. Luonan handed the already useless question board back to Wu Li. Wu Li received it like an idiot. Right now Luonan was sitting in a wheelchair. He was shorter than everyone present, but he grasped the rhythm of the entire scene. He even grasped everyone's mentality. Actually, Secretary Yin knows the best. The acquisition of a processing plant isn't necessarily a large business. The most direct goal is to serve me personally. Personally? The veteran still didn't quite understand Luonan's meaning. Luonan explained to him very patiently, I used to lean towards theoretical research and the mental side. Even though I've learned a few things on and off in terms of design and processing, my practical ability is quite poor. If I want to produce results in a short period of time, I need a high-level technical team to help me realize some of my designs. This is the main goal of my acquisition of the processing plant. Right now, even Yin Lu was very surprised, let alone the veteran and Wu Li. She was mostly baffled as to why the boss was so sincere to the veteran and the others. Wu Li glanced at his master and did what a rash young kid should do. He opened his mouth and said, Mr. Amo. Even though I don't work in the factory, I know that there are over 100 people in the day's factory. There are 2 production lines and the annual production value is several hundred million. There has been a steady income these past few years. If what you mean is that you want to pile everyone into the workshop and let them handle those thoughts for you, this isn't too appropriate, right? The veteran coughed heavily. He was reprimanding his own disciple for being rude, but his ears perked up even more. The factory is a place to train people. Luonan wasn't angry at all. He continued to explain patiently. The master who taught me mechanical design theory once said that designers who haven't gone to the assembly line to polish themselves can basically be viewed as defective products. I am one of them. It's just that I have self-awareness. I don't want to let this shortcoming continue to be magnified. That's why I need Master Show and the experienced technical team under you to provide support and supplement. The veteran couldn't be bothered to be polite at this time. He directly asked, Mr. Mo, what you're saying is that you're acquiring the factory mainly for the skilled technical workers in the factory. The operation is secondary. That's a matter for professionals to handle. I believe that Secretary Yin will provide me with experienced management personnel. And you, as shareholders, will certainly have your own considerations. Luonan didn't pretend at all. He directly came to a conclusion. From my perspective, it's really just a matter of paying attention to people. The veteran's heart sank. This was a situation he had never considered before. It was a direction he found very hard to accept. The reason why he jointly acquired the Day Society's processing plant was to find a temporary industry for the men, women, old and young of the tribe. Therefore, no matter what, the processing plant must be run well. It must be continued as stably as possible. Under these circumstances, how could he find a partner who didn't have the intention to run the plant diligently? The veteran's brows furrowed tightly. Luonan didn't seem to notice. He continued to speak, minding his own business. According to my standards, the level you've displayed so far, including the production line and the whiteboard, are all decent. But they're not good enough. After all, I hope that the products you can bring out aren't limited to just deep diving. Therefore, if we continue to cooperate, Master Show, your team, especially the technical personnel, will need to further broaden their horizons. In short, you can't stick to this one place, Band City. You need to go out for further training to receive tempering. Training? Going out for training. Wu Li's voice suddenly rose by an octave. The veteran was a bit stupefied. He subconsciously locked gazes with his own apprentice, wanting to confirm this information. Going out for training? Leaving Band City? At this moment, the veteran and Wu Li could clearly hear each other's thumping heartbeats. Chapter 828. D City, Spring City, Xia City, G City. Even Luoyang City on the other side of the ocean. As long as it can help me improve, I can consider it. Luonan blurted out the names of the cities he was more familiar with. Objectively speaking, there was a suspicion of exaggeration. However, when it came to expression and speech, this kind of parallelism was definitely very effective. Not to mention that Yinlu was helping him. Though Yinlu didn't understand why Luonan didn't communicate with her beforehand and suddenly said this, one of her duties as a secretary was to support her boss. She began to rack her brain from the moment Luonan brought up this topic. She keenly grasped the opportunity to cut into the topic, taking advantage of the situation to supplement and perfect it. The Castle Financial Group has always had a system of commissioned students. They have cooperated with many famous schools, enterprises, and even the military all over the world. We are happy to give talents with potential a chance to improve further. Of course, we need to sign a training agreement that is in line with the interests of both parties and in accordance with the law. The length of service must also be extended accordingly. That would be more reasonable, more realistic. Veteran Hand and 5 centimeters were breathing heavily, but they didn't even realize it. Mr. Mo's gentle voice continued to seep into their ears and minds. Wei Peixing is an existing system. If you're interested, you can ask Secretary Yin about it. I have no one to speak of. I don't expect everyone on Master Show's side to be talented, but as long as 1 or 2 of them can meet my requirements and be of use to me, I will have achieved my investment goal. The veteran felt that he could no longer hold on. The various worries and barriers in his heart instantly cracked under the plan that the other party seemed to have prepared for a long time. It was just a matter of blowing a breath away from complete collapse. However, Mr. Mo stopped here and returned to the nominal topic of the day. This is it. I'm very satisfied. What procedures do I need to go through if I want to rent it? I'll go get it done. I'll go get it done. Wu Li felt as if he had just woken up from a dream under the illumination of Luonan's gaze. He went to contact the service staff in a flurry. Seizing this opportunity, Veteran Hand deeply adjusted his breathing and calmed down the pain that was hard to control because he had struck his ribs. He also felt joy that was almost uncontrollable. At the very least, it was a form of hope. If the young people in the tribe could take advantage of this cooperation to escape from this cage and live openly under the sun, all the joint venture purchases would not be an obstacle. Right now, the biggest problem was the disparity between the other party's plan and their status as mutants. Mr. Mo's plan was an idealized operation based on technology. He was indeed very capable, but could he break the tacit understanding and agreement between Sakura City, LRCF, and even the major forces in the world? Or to put it more bluntly, was he willing to touch this taboo? Rationally, the veteran was still pessimistic. But no matter what, the other party at least came up with a plan, giving them a glimmer of hope. The veteran could no longer remain calm. Should he talk to Mr. Mo now and tell him about the restrictions they were under? Or should he immerse himself in hope for a while longer before facing the cruel reality? While the conversation in the workshop continued, another black MPV in the trade market ended its several-hour-long cruise and returned to an independent warehouse not far from the dock. During this period of time, the originally empty warehouse had been transformed into a simple command center. The warehouse space of nearly 1,000 square meters still seemed a little empty after filling in all kinds of equipment and people, but soon this place will be filled up. Captain Jimmy jumped out of the car. Behind him, his subordinates were carefully unloading the most important asset in the car, Mr. Neo, who had a tube inserted into the back of his head. The direct goal of the few hours of cruise was to stimulate the memory of Neo, who had been to the trade market before, and to stir up more information from the depths of his brain. With the dual effects of brainwave interference and reading equipment, the results were remarkable. At least, Captain Jimmy was already relatively satisfied. The captive captured on the night of the 7th had exchanged almost everything in a day's time. The only pity was that this guy did not know about the latest structure of the shelter. But it didn't matter. The core council of the Soul Church in the Deep Blue World had already been destroyed. The struggles of these stray dogs did not affect the overall situation. He arrived at the intelligence analysis platform. The positions of a dozen or so important people had already been anchored here. With the help of the SCA's authority system and the existing monitoring equipment in the trade market, they were being tracked throughout the entire process. For some special people, Jimmy had even arranged for a small fry. Wei Pei Sheng and the like are already in place. The voice of Mr. Mo was clearly reproduced in the command center, causing Captain Jimmy to sneer. Veteran Shou Xiong was the clearest in Neo's memory, and it seemed that he was also one of the most important contacts. Of course, he had to be given special treatment, and the 2 investors from the Blood Flame Order were also put under surveillance. The movements of the group of 4 over the past 2 hours were all displayed on the 3D map of the trade market. Their every move was also immediately reproduced under the care of specially arranged monitoring and imaging equipment. Captain Jimmy swept his gaze over the slightly blurry and fake restored image, and turned to the middle-aged man in a suit beside him. Minister O'Hara, I remember that Shou Xiong and the others are restricted personnel? Can the SCA confirm this? Minister O'Hara grinned and tried his best to maintain a professional attitude. Yes, we've marked it very clearly. Shou Xiong and the other members of the Hengduan 7 have social rights limited to a radius of 300 kilometers with the trade market as the center, and there are other restrictions in the city. Then the so-called Wei Pei Sheng is just a glib talker. Minister O'Hara answered without hesitation. Of course, although their relocation to Ban City is a social security action of the Star Alliance Committee, they are also restricted by the regulations of special groups, and they have signed an official agreement. If they violate the regulations and the agreement, they must pay the full cost of the treatment and infection suppression over the years, as well as pay a hefty penalty fee. Captain Jimmy touched the stubble on the top of his head and sneered. Ignoring this kind of problem, the first thing he says is Wei Pei in training. This Mr. Mo is also a person who speaks irresponsibly. Have you found any information on him? The intelligence officer raised his hand. We're currently contacting T-City, there's no need. We can't find this person in the SCA's database, so it's definitely a fake identity. But with Yin Lu, the deputy priestess, endorsing him, his position in the Blood Flame Order must be impressive. Maybe he's a spy arranged by Mrs. Halder. Forget it, it's about time. Let's close the net. As for the evidence, there are so many people we can clean them up with a little trick. Are we really going to treat this as a police case? Minister O'Hara, who worked in the SCA in Ban City and was a senior civil servant, pretended not to hear anything. However, his deputy next to him was a little worried. Now, isn't it a little early? Also, capturing a few hundred people is too big of a movement. Without the cooperation of the local military and police, we can't do it. That's why we have to act during the day. Most of them are on the production line, so it's easier to catch them than at night. As for cooperation, of course we have to cooperate. Lord Dayun, I'm counting on you. Minister O'Hara failed to pretend to be deaf. His face was stiff and he forced a smile. The illegal order is a cancer, and we can work hard to get rid of it as soon as possible. We are very willing to cooperate, but Captain Jimmy, in the information you provided, it was also mentioned that the peaceful trade market is in a special area in Ban City. With my authority, I can't mobilize enough police here. In fact, the SCA needs to coordinate with the police again. Don't worry about coordination. Don't we have Supervisor Bai? She's been hanging out with that guy from the Yuchuan family for the past 2 days, so she can help. Captain Jimmy grinned, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. Pack up all the information we've collected and send it over. If there are any problems that need to be solved, tell her and ask for instructions from her. I heard that at the end of last year, because she didn't take a vacation, her performance was deducted completely. If she wants to turn things around this year, she'll definitely be more proactive than us. As he spoke, the intelligence officer in charge of organizing the data had already obeyed his order and sent out the corresponding information. Captain Jimmy smiled in satisfaction and temporarily left the intelligence analysis platform. As he walked, he cracked his neck and the joints of his neck bones creaked. There was also the sound of special metal being stretched, and only he could feel the subtle vibrations. He wasn't worried about any big movements. The dynamo core had already been updated to the 7th generation, and it had pushed him to complete a complete transformation. He was the first batch of Deep Blue Walkers to complete this kind of change. Even Tian Bang, who had made a name for himself last year and was known as the #1 person below the extraordinaries, had only just begun testing the 6th generation of products. Thanks to Professor Luo, if it wasn't for his cage theory, the experimental reality wouldn't have been able to complete the new generation of products so quickly. Right now he couldn't wait to test it out in real combat. Even though he might not even need to do anything against this motley crew. From the warehouse, he could vaguely see the upper deck of the luxurious yacht from the distant pier. Investors of the Blood Flame Order? It would be fine if they were tactful, but if they were stubborn enough to get involved, he didn't mind using this order, which was going downhill, as a sacrificial target. Captain, Supervisor buys orders. Captain Jimmy snapped his fingers. Okay, get ready. Captain? The intelligence officer's voice was somewhat hoarse. Wait a moment, Supervisor Bai has refused to authorize us. Captain Jimmy suddenly turned around. What kind of joke is this? Chapter 829. Supervisor Bai, regarding the arrest operation, I hope you can give me a clearer instruction. Captain Jimmy felt that his authority as a leader had been seriously challenged after making a fool of himself in front of his subordinates. He immediately called Bai Xinyan and taunted her back in a seemingly polite but actually forceful manner. The response from the other side was very flat. Then you can rest here and continue monitoring if you have nothing to do. The only thing you are not allowed to do is make any arrests. Do you understand? What was with this unusually arrogant attitude? Captain Jimmy did not care about his tone. He had never taken Bai Xinyan seriously in the past. Today he was unexpectedly hit with a stick. Now that he had to respond, the other party's attitude was like adding fuel to the fire. He unconsciously raised his voice. Reason? Overall judgment. What a good reason. Captain Jimmy could no longer maintain his polite facade. The only thing that drove him to continue speaking was the long distance that his fists could not reach. He could only smash his fist against the wall of the warehouse and explain his reason through gritted teeth. From Neo, we can confirm that there are missionaries from the Soul Cult who have made contact with the nomads of the 7 tribes and are preaching. The fish that slipped through the net 2 nights ago has most likely re-established contact with them. That person is an important person who has control of the shelter's new core configuration. If we allow him to spread this configuration and allow the Soul Cult to rise from the ashes, who among us can bear the responsibility? The configuration is only a standard, there are no secrets. As for the Soul Cult, as long as they use this method to preach, they are destined to lose everything. Bai Xinyan was still calm and collected. She did not mind debating with Captain Jimmy. As long as we know the people involved, it doesn't matter if it's the new version or the old version. It's not difficult for us to analyze it. As long as we can decipher it with the characteristics of the shelter, the faster it spreads, the greater the harvest will be. Why not? Of course, I'm just saying this casually. Currently, the situation in Ban City is very complicated. There are a few people with strong influence and leadership who are not emotionally stable. I don't want a problem that could have been easily solved to become a problem because of someone's violent style. How about this explanation? Captain Jimmy's head was about to explode from anger. You directly pointed out names. Don't you feel tired of beating around the bush? Bai Xinyan's low chuckle came through the communicator. This is indeed a problem of understanding. Of course, there are some small taboos. As the commanding officer of the operation team who has undergone strict training, you should have this basic quality. Captain Jimmy, you can come up with a new plan and report it to me according to the procedures. I will make a fair judgment. Please believe in my basic qualities. Manners my ass. The true god of the Amaterasu cult is a big shot, but does he need you to flatter him in such a roundabout way? The corner of Captain Jimmy's eye twitched. If they were face to face, he might just throw a punch at them and walk away. But if he took the initiative to hang up now, things would be even more difficult to solve. Damn it, it's better to be in charge than a county magistrate. When he was sent to Ban City to carry out a mission, he didn't expect that he would be defeated by a woman who was only a manager in name. It shouldn't be. Bai Xinyan was indeed a manager appointed by Quantum Corporation. She also had a very strong relationship with the Deep Blue Laboratory. Rumor had it that she was Wang Yu's lover. But this wasn't a reason for her to overrule the judgment of the frontline commander. Jimmy and his operation team originally belonged directly to the Deep Blue Laboratory. But when they were experimenting with the 7th generation Dynamo Core, their affiliation was transferred to the Apocalypse Laboratory. Between the two labs in Deep Blue World, no matter how one looked at it, Apocalypse had the upper hand over Deep Blue. Even if Captain Jimmy was just a new subordinate with a shallow foundation, there was no need for him to suffer by Xinyan's vexation. After a momentary clash of thoughts, one side gained the absolute upper hand. Captain Jimmy gritted his teeth. I will stand by my position and judgment on this matter. I will also report it to the laboratory. When the time comes, I will ask Manager Bai to communicate with Manager Yen. Who? That light and even disdainful tone clearly had nothing to do with the question. Captain Jimmy choked and couldn't speak anymore. If he said anything more, he would only be humiliating himself. Not only that, but his superior and backer would also be implicated. The terrible atmosphere of the call finally collapsed, and Captain Jimmy almost crushed his communicator. With a gloomy face, he paced around the corner of the warehouse a few times. Several times he wanted to make a long-distance call, but in the end he didn't choose such a lowly way to complain. In the end he chose to use the form of a short message. After considering a few words that could barely be considered objective, he described the situation here and sent it to the other side. 5 minutes later there was a buzzing sound, and the other side replied to the message. The sender was Yen Yongbua. The message was very short. Watch the show first. Captain Jimmy had followed this person for more than half a year, and he knew that this true superior of his wasn't referring to Bai Xinyan, nor was he referring to Bai Xinyan. Instead, he was referring to the greatest pleasure he had been looking forward to recently. It was a show of coercion and bribery led by capitalists in the vast Pacific Ocean. So far, the stage had not even been moved yet. With the attitude of the superiors on both sides, what else could Captain Jimmy do? He wanted to curse, but he forcefully pushed his emotions back down into his stomach under the gazes of the people around him. The special metal on the back of his neck seemed to be ringing, but this time it was irritating and uncomfortable. It even seemed to make his neck and shoulders ache. Captain Jimmy patted the back of his neck and ground his teeth. He stomped heavily on the ground and returned to the intelligence station. The operation will be cancelled for now, but keep a close eye on these people. Not a single one can be missed. The intelligence clerk didn't want to talk too much, but there was something he needed to ask. The two people from the Blood Flame Order. How should we deal with them? Captain Jimmy's dark face exuded a bit of green. He stared at the clerk with a look that made it seem as if he wanted to eat him up. But in the end he only spat out 2 words from between his teeth. Keep an eye on them. The clouds that had been stifling for over 10 hours finally condensed into droplets of water in the middle of the afternoon. It began to rain with a pitter-patter. Lu held up an umbrella as she escorted Luonan back to the yacht. Snake Tongue welcomed him respectfully and helped Luonan change into his casual home clothes. Then she said, "My lord, it seems that there are people in the vicinity of the pier who harbor evil intentions towards us." Snake Tongue knew that Luonan's mental senses were sharper than hers, but as a member left behind, it was her duty to report problems. Luonan went, "Oh." He was disinclined to put on an expression. "Just keep an eye on them. Everyone keep an eye on them. They probably won't start fighting for a while." Yes. 3 hours had passed since the short-term rental agreement was finalized. During this time, Luonan stayed in his rented workshop to familiarize himself with the equipment. He drafted an experimental plan according to the relevant circumstances. How to integrate the high-end technology and high-end requirements of the mysterious alien civilization with the reality of Earth's environment. This difficult problem consumed a large amount of his brain cells. It made him lazy and somewhat unable to lift his spirits. However, he still attached great importance to the group of people in the warehouse at the pier. Especially the leader. The structure of his body and soul was very valuable for research. Unfortunately, the current environment of Ban City was complicated. Everyone was afraid to take action, so Luonan needed to keep a low profile as much as possible. Sometimes he couldn't keep a low profile. At the very least, he needed to learn to feign ignorance. Luonan had just learned this. At this time, Lu delivered the latest information she had gathered. It was related to the Hungduan 7 tribes. It was also the so-called restricted residence situation in Ban City. Luonan skimmed through it twice before putting it down. Lu had already explained the specific information and sensitive points to him. He wasn't a person of the law. He didn't need to consider too many minor details when solving problems. In short, in order to smoothly implement the Wei Pei student system, Ban City won't let people go. Is that right? It's not just Ban City. Ever since every major city enacted vagrant laws one after another to guide vagrants back, A pattern has been formed on how to deal with people infected with abnormalities. It is an established rule that is tacitly agreed upon by the entire world. There were some words that Yinlu didn't mind, but she had no choice but to say it again. Mister, with your status and identity, most likely no one will go against your wishes. But if you use a system to replace the established rules, then the nature will be different. Luonan went, oh. He didn't say anything else. He seemed to be pondering, but he also seemed to be lost in thought. Half a minute later, the virtual work area in front of him suddenly opened. Yinlu was too close, so she was hit by the projected light. She hurriedly moved to the side. But she saw that the work area was displaying the psychic diagram of the deep sea from yesterday morning. Needless to say, this was yet another leap of thought that she couldn't understand. Luonan's hand casually streaked across the image of the deep sea. Finally, his fingertips stopped at the corner of the image where the only light was. I've dealt with the matter of mutated infections before. I was quite nervous at the time. It seemed that if I wasn't able to control it, it could turn into a disaster like Resident Evil. But now it looks like everyone already has a set rule. Do you have the specific data on the number of people infected with abnormalities in the entire world? You're saying? The number of people living together and scattered, treatment control, death? Luonan spoke without thinking and Yinlu understood. I will collect comprehensive data and report it to you. His fingertips continued to move across the psychic diagram. Luonan had the impulse to continue modifying, refining and completing the diagram, but he controlled this impulse. This was because he knew that it wasn't time yet. He was still lacking in maturity. The infected with abnormalities, the deep blue world, the soul cult. I have to look at everything together. Yinlu instantly discovered that she had accepted an extremely thorny task. But at the same time, this was perhaps the first task she had accepted. It was a task that truly suited her identity as Boss Luo's secretary. She took a deep breath and bowed once more to show her seriousness. Chapter 830. My memories of that time have always been blurry and I have been brooding over it. Back then, that experience was like a divine revelation. It was an easy harvest. It made me, a backpacker who had always been restless, to the point that I took the initiative to venture into the wilderness, wild with joy. As time passed and my understanding of the divine revelation deepened, it easily became a burden. Knowledge and energy are completely different. The latter can be transformed in many forms, but knowledge itself shouldn't have fallen from the sky. It shouldn't have been forcefully stuffed into one's memories. I don't like the reason, divine revelation. I want it to have a process of cognition, understanding and digestion. This is more in line with the value of this knowledge itself. Therefore, I traced back hoping to be able to straighten out the entire vein. Xuanhuan was a person with a story. Luonan read Xuanhuan's reply and felt rather moved by some of the passages. This was the first time he knew that Xuanhuan's exquisite and profound creation law system was obtained in such a way. Inevitably, Luonan had a few relevant and reasonable conjectures regarding the source of this system. Xuanhuan most likely thought the same. Therefore, he was very interested in the information released by the Horned Demon about the Wilderness Laboratory. He didn't have to travel 1,000 miles to investigate. In the past, Luonan and Xuanhuan had a friendly relationship, but it wasn't to the point of confiding in each other. However, Luonan's translation of the lamination interference technique had a powerful catalytic effect. It had indeed achieved the effect that Luonan hoped for. Everything is understood without words. But with the temperament of the two, they wouldn't talk too deeply about this problem. In fact, this was only a small portion of Xuanhuan's series of replies. It was a sudden sigh. The main content was still deciphering the material. The lamination interference dynamo core technique is my favorite type. There aren't many mechanics and there are few assumptions. It is established on the basis of sufficient observation and material collection. It excavates the existing laws of the world, as well as positive interactions with humans. Show them and use them. The world is material in the end. Its ultimate form of expression is material. It requires material products to serve as proof. The author of the article has shown us the exquisite transformation from one material form to another material form. There are many illusions in the world that confuse the senses, but this is not one of them. This is a flow process that changes at will. Every link can stand up to scrutiny, showing the absolute beauty of the eternal change of the material world. When people were awed by this beauty, the author had achieved his goal. The biggest limitation of using this technology comes from ourselves. Whether we have the ability to understand and reproduce its aesthetics, as well as the material basis to match the aesthetics. Dean Juan was full of praise for the information on the stacking interference technology, and some of it was even sublimated to the point of poetry. However, most of it was still the analysis of the specific content, which was basically a careful reading of word by word. The various flaws of Luo Nan's forceful translation were undoubtedly exposed under this sort of study. He was forced to constantly rework, checking for loopholes and filling in the gaps. Only then was he able to resist Dean Juan's powerful and strict logic. However, Luo Nan obtained even more. A lot of experience, calculations and speculations were no longer limited to the lamination interference technology itself, but included the reflection of Director Juan's entire knowledge structure. All of this was presented in front of them through the text, graphics, and even the content of the demonstration sent back by President Juan. It was impossible for all of this to be transmitted all at once. In fact, this was already the sixth wave of feedback that Luo Nan had received. It was a vast book of over 100,000 words, but it was only a cursory reading of the entire material and a small part of it. With Dean Juan's help, Luo Nan was able to read very thoroughly, even though he had only read a small portion of the material. He had basically grasped the core concept of this material. The intricate structure design had been deciphered almost perfectly. Only the most important part, as well as the most important part, was the processing. Both the material and Dean Juan liked to call it the creation stage. It was here that he encountered the same old problem as before. The processing environment and requirements of the mysterious extraterrestrial civilization were far superior. The disparity with the simple and crude conditions of Earth formed a barrier that was hard to surmount for a time. In the past, Luo Nan could only completely rely on the virtual brain system when he encountered this sort of thing. He followed the calculations of its intelligence to reduce, and reduce again until he could bear it. The exoskeleton laid with the electromagnetic muscle membrane structure was the product of this subtraction, and it was also the final plan that could only be realized after the God-binding hoop and the biological reactor were two hard goods. But this time, neither Luo Nan nor Dean Juan had any intentions of compromising. They didn't consider creating a high-end psychic core product in a short amount of time, but they didn't want to make do with it. They just researched and pondered bit by bit, starting from the core concept that was already relatively clear. They first did subtraction, then they did addition. They saw if they could find a winding and complicated path that would allow them to bypass this obstacle in the end. We need to start from configuration design. The greater the material conditions, the greater the changes in configuration design. The lamination interference technology is a mature plan. Even though there are restrictions here and there, it is already close to being a public product. We can basically confirm that it can be used by the majority of people at the corresponding level. But we don't need to consider this situation. First, we can make a private version that meets certain conditions. Perhaps this will be closer to the author's original design. This was Dean Juan's train of thought. It was indeed very reasonable. Then the core responsibility of changing the design was pressed onto Luo Nan's shoulders. This wasn't cheating. Dean Juan believed that Luo Nan's level of configuration design was far above his own. Luo Nan was the best and most suitable choice in the world. As for Luo Nan, even though he communicated with Dean Juan and asked for help from the Juan court, he wasn't willing to let someone else handle this important link. After all, this was something that belonged to him and his family. He had always believed this. Since a consensus was reached, another round of research had arrived. There is a fundamental difference between imitation and plagiarism. Being able to design and being able to do it are two different things. It's an excellent train of thought, but these problems appeared when I repeated it. The problem with the secondary structure needs to be explained clearly. I don't understand it and I think it's too complicated. It doesn't conform to the refinement and elegance of the design itself. My opinion is. Back and forth discussions, learning, borrowing, and even debates and quarrels took up the majority of Luo Nan's time. Well, no quarrels were more painful than quarrels. Luo Nan and Dean Juan did not use instant messaging tools in order to guarantee the security and privacy of the data and communications. Instead, they used the psychic wave network of the Xia City branch to conduct encrypted mail transmissions. The more restricted the communication, the more the two sides needed to rack their brains. They needed to thoroughly research the issues raised by the other side, and then transcribe a sufficiently persuasive reason. It was very difficult to mix emotional things into this. It needed to be rigorous and thorough, or else it would just be a waste of an opportunity to communicate. It would delay the progress of both sides. From Luo Nan's perspective, this was a novel feeling that he rarely experienced. There were some aspects of thinking that he might never be able to touch, but they were cornerstone-like existences to Xuanhuan. The enormous gap between priority and backwardness would inevitably lead to conflict. In the end, it was possible to reach an agreement. It was possible for both sides to compromise, but it was also possible for them to shelve it. But even so, the efficiency was still increasing. There was a qualitative difference between one person and two people. The pleasant surprise of having an outstanding answer placed in front of one's eyes as soon as one opened one's eyes was extremely refreshing. Luonan would not slack off because of this. He hoped that Xuanhuan felt the same way. Use your strengths. Be anxious for my needs. Be more realistic. Be more pragmatic. I still have to walk the mental side. The most malleable thing in the body and soul framework is soul strength. Xuanhuan's brain was a lump of wood. It seems that I can do a bit of work with the structure of space and time. This kind of structure is very ambiguous in the virtual brain system. It is considered to be on the material side, but there is also a core of the mental side. Combining the strengths of the two is a bit interesting. Luonan muttered to Xuanhuan and the principles he set himself as he continued the design process. The virtual work area had complex configuration lines, but what flashed through his mind was only 10 times, 100 times more. He had inspiration. He just persevered in searching for the most suitable one. This was the image of Mr. Mo that veteran saw when he came in. There was no greeting. Perhaps Mr. Mo didn't discover his arrival at all. Or perhaps Mr. Mo didn't have any intention of diverting his attention. Veteran Han didn't get angry. Miraculously, Luonan's nagging chanting sutras unconsciously eased his stomach full of grievances and oppressiveness. He stabilized the moving frame that he had pushed over and found a chair in the workshop. He rested for a while, not opening his mouth. He just let Luonan continue to chant. He was very familiar with this scene. In the past, when he was pondering over designs and repairing things in the wilderness, it was basically like this when he encountered a difficult problem. How could there be such a peaceful environment back then? On the plateau and in the mountains, the howling of the wind and the roars of beasts could be heard from time to time. There were even the sounds of explosions and fighting. They disturbed him all the time. In those times, only talking to himself and forming a domain could help him concentrate his mind until he entered a state of high concentration. This sort of situation practically disappeared after arriving in Ban City. Even if he researched some things, his goal wasn't as pure as it was back then. It must be the beautifying effect of his memories. Veteran never cared to beautify his past experiences. But as he grew older, he couldn't help but reminisce about them. Occasionally, he would dream about them in the middle of the night, and it was as if he had returned to the wilderness where life and death swayed. He even often thought about it. If only he could have died a happy death back then. That would certainly be the most perfect ending. A sudden vibration from his wrist interrupted his thoughts at this time. It seemed to affect the rhythm and atmosphere of the room. Luonan's gaze shifted from behind the workbench. His brows furrowed. Chapter 831. The wristband vibrated silently, but it created an abnormal effect. For a moment, the veteran felt that his face was a little numb. He didn't know if it was because of Mr. Mo's piercing gaze. He hurriedly tried to turn it off, but it was too late. The veteran could only smile awkwardly. He first nodded to apologize to Mr. Mo, then looked at the contact person. Soon his old face sank. It was that bastard occupant Rongsan. The anger in his heart burst out again, but he didn't want to disturb Mr. Mo, so he got up and walked out. When he was about to go out, he finally couldn't help but say stiffly, "If it's still the same words, there's no need to talk anymore." He really didn't talk for long. In less than 2 minutes, he turned back from outside the house. At this time, he saw Mr. Mo standing in front of the mobile shelf he brought, looking at the hanging exoskeleton frame, and rubbing it with his hands to test it. The rough skeleton on the shelf was really a skeleton. It was called an exoskeleton, but it wasn't the time to design the appearance yet. Everything was simple. It was just bones pieced together in various ways. Just looking at the details, it was good craftsmanship, but looking at the whole thing, it didn't look like it. The main material of the assembled bones was an amphibious mutant called Ox Demon in Ban City. Yes, it was made from the prototype of the mutant dark dragon god Wilderness Spirit, worshipped by the Great Zay cult. It was also ironic that the processing plant where the veteran worked belonged to the Great Zay Society controlled by the Great Zay cult. But in this factory, the most representative source of high-end processing materials was the Ox Demon. A considerable part of its technology came from the Great Zay cult. The veteran then knew not to take the so-called faith in Ban City seriously. It was just that. "I'm sorry for what happened just now," The veteran still wanted to express his apology, but Mr. Mo raised his hand to stop him. Don't mind it, let's talk business. Oh, the processing of this set of exoskeleton was done according to your instructions. The inner marrow of the ox demon was activated, and then redesigned and pieced together. Every piece of bone is processed according to the sample standard you gave me before. I've also worked on every piece. After going through a special process, the skeleton was dark yellow and slightly transparent. The outer layer seemed to be smeared with a layer of wax. It was oily and slightly bumpy to the touch. While he was speaking, Mr. Mo did something, but the rough skeletons hanging on the shelves creaked and let out a dense, sizzling sound. At first it sounded like an electric shock, but later, it sounded more like a boiling liquid. Under the dark yellow wax that had been processed, one could also see the expanding and bursting bubbles. After another second, the orange flames ignited with a whoosh. Following the wax that covered the surface, the rough skeleton was completely set on fire. The flames started from underneath the wax, and the bones sizzled as they burned, as if they could crack and be destroyed at any time. If the processing of the materials was not up to standard, it could really be destroyed. The veteran stared at him. Mr. Mo had done this several times before, and each time he would pay the full amount of the materials. Because of this, the rework made him lose face. This time it could also be the beginning of another rework. In fact, the veteran could see from the first time that with Mr. Mo's high standards, his current apprentices could not keep up with the pace, so he had to do it himself. In total, he had been tossing and turning for almost 50 hours. It was hard to say what the result would be. The veteran had not encountered such an unconfident job for many years. Fortunately, this time, even when the flames were extinguished and the wax on the surface burned through, the bones were still intact, but they had obviously shrunk a little. There was still a layer of blood coming out of the bones. It was like the state when they were just killed and peeled off. There was still the smell of blood that had not cooled off. Mr. Mo stretched out his hands, grabbed one of the slender bones and pulled it with force. The bones were like elastic rods. After bending, they naturally bounced back. But immediately after, Mr. Mo used the same action, and the bones turned into metal-like materials. They twisted and changed shape, twisting into an irregular, strange circle. Left there, the other bones also twisted. Finally, with a flick of Mr. Mo's finger, all the bones recovered their elasticity. They buzzed and bounced back to their original state. The veteran's eyebrows twitched as he watched. After the bones went through a few rounds of processing, the elasticity and plasticity could reach this contradictory and unified state at any time. It was already very similar to some cutting-edge military rare alloys. The most important thing was that it still preserved the special activity of the mutated bones. There was a lot of research that could be done here. It was just that the strength and lifespan were unknown. After decades of accumulation and the recent hot catalysis of the deep blue walkers, the technology of the exoskeleton armor was already very mature. Although it was only a rough mold, the veteran could still see that some of the design ideas that Mr. Mo requested were mimicry transformations, which belonged to the field that he was most proficient in. The veteran really wanted to delve deeper into it, but the mundane tasks around him made him irritated. He looked at the pure and focused Mr. Mo, who was focused on examining the bones, and unconsciously sighed. It's okay. Don't worry too much. Waha. Mr. Mo was still examining the various indicators of the bones. He didn't turn around, but his words seemed to be exceptionally comforting. The Amaterasu cult released a silent fart and digested it in their crotch. Right now, all parties in Ban City are a little confused. It's normal for the Great Zay cult to have a change of heart. Is that so? The veteran was really a little confused when he was suddenly brought up to the level of the Amaterasu cult. Speaking of which, this was the first time that Mr. Mo took the initiative to talk to him about the current situation. All of a sudden, it was so high-end that it made him a little embarrassed. So it's useless to worry. It's better to concentrate on the matter at hand. Mr. Mo obviously used the logic of a technician. This couldn't be considered comforting, but the veteran just liked this. His old and hot-tempered temper that had been honed for decades was exposed at this moment. He didn't want Mr. Mo to look down on him, so he temporarily threw away all the worries in his heart and rolled up his sleeves. What am I worried about? I'll worry for whoever gives me money. Is there anything that needs to be adjusted? I've seen a few connecting parts and they seem to be very crude when they were designed. The veteran rubbed his palms together and stepped forward. Whether he had really thought it through or just mustered up a moment of anger, in short, he had returned to his previous unscrupulous state. He discussed in front of the skeleton and adjusted it, but he didn't know that Mr. Mo, who had become silent again, was paying attention to his mood, body, and even the various slight changes in his aura and magnetic field, in a way that was very difficult for him to understand. Chapter 832. Right now many people in Ban City were restless. From Luonan's perspective, he just lived his life as he should. There were many things to do in the last 2 or 3 days, but they weren't complicated. He even felt that things were simpler. But for other people the feeling was completely different. 3 days had passed since Luonan and the True God engaged in a long-distance battle on the night of May 8th. Since then, the True God returned to Ban City and threw a huge tantrum, so much so that the weather in Ban City was affected. It was true that the power of extraordinaries was inconceivable, but no matter how inconceivable a True God was, he was still a living being. It was impossible for the material world to withstand the influence of the True God's emotional fluctuations. In fact, the impact on the mental plane was the most direct. It was just that the majority of the power stirred up a storm in the abyssal region. What sank into the sea of consciousness was merely the aftermath. Then there were the aftermath waves, which lasted for dozens of hours. It was more than enough for people to enjoy. This was especially true for the half-baked veteran. His bubble cage in the sea of consciousness was sturdier than that of an ordinary person, but it couldn't compare to that of a truly powerful person. He was tainted with many negative things for no reason, and they slowly sank into his heart. It was equivalent to a chronic poison. The size of the effect depended on the dosage. There would certainly be benefits in relieving the effects early. This was the result of Luonan's observations, but it was only a small part of the overall conclusion. Luonan could use some small tricks to help the veteran resolve the effects, but it was not easy to accomplish on a broader and deeper level. For example, old injuries, mutant infections, and the natural process of aging. If the veteran were to be the center, then everything would be filled with imbalances and incongruities. This old man, who had abundant experiences in the first half of his life, would gradually lose the opportunity to adjust the balance. He would endlessly consume his life force, and he would walk toward his predestined end. People still had to go through a considerable stage to experience it with their senses. But in terms of pure calculation, the feeling of seeing the answer with a glance was not too comfortable. Putting himself in Luonan's shoes and experiencing it on this basis, the feeling was even more difficult to describe. But Luonan still wanted to study. He didn't just study the veteran. He also studied the various people around him. In the end, he transformed the results of his observations into his own body, forming a conclusion. The conclusion came from him, spread to others, and returned to him. Thus, a complete chain of standards, observations, and corrections was formed. As for the standards of observation, Luonan had long since grasped the basic principles of matching the structure of body and soul. He had used his mother's coupling theory in conjunction with Gym Master Xiu's 9 orifices 6 roots technique to gradually fumble his way out. Luonan possessed an extremely strong personal style. Now that he had combined it with the concept of extraterrestrial civilization described by the lamination interference technology and verified it with each other, regardless of whether it was compatible or not, it was still an experience. He set his sights higher and gradually formed an ideal outline. He used this standard to examine himself and the physical and spiritual framework of the people around him. There was no doubt that most of them, including him, were defective goods. This won't work. As expected, I still have to invest elsewhere. What? Old Hand thought that Mr. Emo was talking to him, so he turned around. Luonan shook his head. He just said, "There's no need to change the basic design. Can you handle the fine-tuning of the details now?" Of course, the rent for this workshop is high, but the equipment is complete. There was no need to return to the factory. It would only take half an hour at most. However, I need your cooperation. Oh. Old Hand emptied his mind when it came to the field of expertise. His voice was raised by half a pitch. This toy is rough, but it's still an exoskeleton. It's also custom-made. It needs to be adjusted according to the actual situation. Mr. Emo is using it for himself, right? It's best to get on it and take a look. Makes sense. Luonan readily accepted the advice, even though there was a bit of difference between the actual situation and what Old Hand imagined. At this time, Old Hand was a bit hesitant. Is it convenient? Luonan laughed when he saw Old Hand's gaze cast at his legs. That was right. He was still a disabled person. Actually, a few days of time was enough for the replaced spinal nerves to fully integrate with his body. He didn't even sit in a wheelchair indoors anymore. When he went out, he reluctantly sat in a wheelchair for the sake of maintaining his persona. Old Hand only knew that Mr. Emo was recovering from his injuries. He was worried that it would cause a relapse. There's nothing inconvenient about it. Luonan took 2 steady steps and assumed a stance. He indicated to Old Hand to help him put the exoskeleton, which still had a bit of warmth, on his body. It was a simple and crude exoskeleton frame. The power and conduction devices weren't installed. It was more like a burden to forcefully put it on his body. But Old Hand was an expert in this field. Luonan had a good grasp of the situation. He gave it a simple test on his body and roughly understood the situation. The load-bearing spine is conservative. The flexibility can be adjusted a bit. It's fine if it's not carrying weight. If you want flexibility, the lower limbs can be adjusted. The joint design can be changed. There's no need to make such a big move. Old Hand wasn't clear on Mr. Mo's usage route, but Luonan was very clear on the use of this crude exoskeleton in the restoration process of the lamination interference technique. There were some functions that weren't necessary, but there were some functions that needed to be perfected. He issued an order to the window system within the external neuron, changing the projection mode from a design perspective to an experiential perspective. The virtual work area behind the workbench disappeared. Then the radiance of the projection sprinkled down on an area of several square meters with Luonan at the center. The radiance completely covered him, merging him with the projection area as one. It wasn't very convenient for ordinary people to use this mode. They needed to coordinate with other tools to perform self-reflection, but Luonan didn't need this at all. He was able to inspect and grasp the situation of his entire body just by relying on his mental senses. He also had the spare capacity to control the projection area. He carried out fine adjustments to make it conform to the material structure on the plane of reality. Luonan's series of operations were actually more convenient for Old Hand. Old Hand was soon able to clearly distinguish the layers of the structure from the blurred and chaotic light and shadow effects. It was as if he had received a specialized demonstration. 1, 2, 3. Old Hand counted seriously. He confirmed that Mr. Mo had consciously divided the design of his virtual work area into 3 layers. Mr. Mo himself was in the innermost layer, the core layer. The crude exoskeleton frame was in the second layer, the middle layer. The outermost layer was a virtual 3D structure drawn purely from dots of light, lines, symbols, and shadows. It was extremely complex and inexplicable. Old Hand narrowed his eyes for a long time, but he was unable to find the meaning behind it. So he tactfully shut his mouth. He no longer used his old experience to frame Mr. Mo's train of thought. He didn't know what Mr. Mo was planning in the end, but he could confirm that this definitely wasn't at the level of a deep dive simulation. Chapter 833. This must be the big shots from the inner world. I can't compete with them. I can't compete with them. Sure enough, it's more realistic for a small fry to build a shelter bit by bit. Compared to the capriciousness of the Great Swamp Church, Veteran had a stronger resistance to the bizarre scene in front of him. After a slight fluctuation in his heart, he regained his balance. He looked at the exquisite structure that Mr. Mo had planned purely with an attitude of appreciation and knowledge. He saw that the dark red color of the exoskeleton skeleton due to repeated processing had become more intense. It seemed to be glowing as if the marrow inside the skeleton had turned into a fluid that passed through the various connection points of the exoskeleton and connected them step by step. It was obvious that the aberration trait inside had been activated. Veteran was most familiar with his own work. He could see the state of the processed skeleton at a glance. While processing, the activity of the aberration trait was retained. This was the core of this set of technology, and it was also the most valuable part. Generally speaking, this reserved aberration trait existed as a stimulant. It stimulated the user's potential for a short period of time and exploded with extraordinary power. Then the user would have to bear the corresponding risks. That minor brother of the Soul Church had half died because of this. However, the aberration trait usually took effect through infiltration and infection of flesh and blood. There was not much meaning in simply activating it. Mr. Mo, on the other hand, seemed to be using it as some kind of fuel. As for the first fire that ignited it, Mr. Mo's deeply controlled and rhythmic breathing, as well as the somewhat inflated outline of his body, formed an obvious causal relationship with it. Veteran judged that Mr. Mo had activated his physical strength, giving the skeleton a driving force, causing the aberration trait inside to ignite. It circulated and changed in the specially designed structure before being output to the outer layer. The inner layer, the middle layer, followed by the outer layer. The illusory light and shadow symbols that were presented by the projection function seemed to have become a substantial existence. The energy that was transmitted from the inner and middle layers was injected into it. It flowed endlessly along the planned structure and gradually dispersed in an orderly manner, causing the three-dimensional projection structure of the outermost layer to become more and more complex. Veteran's vision was a little blurred. He unconsciously blinked, and when his pupils focused again, the scene in front of him became even more absurd. The complex projection symbols and structure at the outermost layer gradually became blurred. To be more precise, what was blurred was the boundary between them and the surrounding space. It was as if there was some sort of fade effect, causing the projected 3D structure to fade layer by layer from the outermost edge. Energy conduction was from the inside to the outside, while fading away was from the outside to the inside. It was unknown what kind of logic was reflected in the process of changing in completely opposite directions. At this time, the most eye-catching thing was the middle-level exoskeleton skeleton. This thing also seemed to feel the contradiction between the two changes, and it seemed to be squeezed by an invisible force. Its originally relatively stable physical form also began to distort, vibrate, and sway, and the amplitude rapidly increased. Ouch! Veteran cried out involuntarily. He saw that the skeleton on Mr. Mo's body was pressing against Mr. Mo's body, but due to the limitations of the protective structure, it missed by a few millimeters. His reputation and face had almost been destroyed. In that instant of change, the low and hoarse sound of the joints rubbing against each other made one suspect that it might collapse by itself at any time. At this time, the exoskeleton was simply a bone demon that had lost control. But in just 1 or 2 seconds, the periphery of the out-of-control bone demon entered the fade effect area. Without any privileges, the exoskeleton that was refined from the bones of the ox ghost slowly faded and disappeared, just like the projection symbol structure. The exoskeleton was still struggling and twisting, but this weird effect process was irreversible. Fade, erase, disappear. The series of demonstrations and actions just now seemed to be some kind of special ritual that made the expensive exoskeleton complete the transformation from real to intangible, and then it disappeared without a trace. It really disappeared completely and not even a piece of it was left. Just when Veteran almost thought that even Mr. Mo was going to be fated, the chaotic and treacherous situation came to an abrupt end. Mr. Mo let out a long breath. There were already traces of sweat on his forehead and sideburns. Obviously, the period of time just now had consumed a lot of his physical strength and energy. Not bad. It basically meets the requirements. Veteran was a little dazed, which was rare for him, until Mr. Mo called him back to reality. Master Sho, there are still some small changes inside. Veteran felt as if he had just woken up from a dream. Speaking of which, it was also the first time he saw Mr. Mo's strength. It was a little difficult to jump from his first impression of a handicapped person to this channel. So he subconsciously asked a few more questions. What were you doing just now? Using absoluteness to imitate relativity, and using perfection to simulate imperfection. Oh, what I mean is that I need to enter an absolute and perfect state, but I can't reach it at my current realm. I can only use external objects and corresponding designs to magnify and improve in order to strive to achieve my goal in a limited area. Master Sho, the exoskeleton you made basically meets my requirements, but there must be some minor adjustments in the design and craftsmanship. The craftsmanship can't be considered as minor adjustments, right? Veteran finally calmed down and talked about the matter as it stood, but for some reason he felt a little diffident. The strength that Mr. Mo displayed far exceeded the upper limit of his estimation. Was this a belated show of strength? Was this a warning for the slow progress of his investment business? Veteran could not help but feel petty, but Mr. Mo was easier to talk to than he imagined. In terms of craftsmanship, I will ask another friend, and I will send you the specific suggestions later. But during this period, Master Sho, you will have to prepare more raw materials. This was expected, so Veteran asked casually, how many? Based on the finished product, at least 10 or 20 sets. You are going to arm a squadron? They are expendable. Recalling the distorted appearance of the exoskeleton before it disappeared, Veteran easily believed it. He wanted to ask for more details, but he saw Mr. Mo's expression become serious. His attention shifted, and he seemed to have picked up a certain communication. He mumbled, "Sis." Half a second later he said, "Yes, it's convenient." No matter what he said, his eyes subconsciously glanced at the Veteran. The latter was a perceptive person. He did not say much, nodded, and quickly turned to leave so that everyone would not feel awkward. But when he was about to leave, Veteran still heard Mr. Mo's amplified voice. Chapter 834. The departing veteran didn't know that Luonan was still feeling a bit awkward inside the room. He had been floating outside for over 10 days since he left Xia City. Not many days had passed, but he had experienced many things. He felt as if a lifetime had passed when he suddenly received He Yuan's call. The reason why he felt this way was because He Yuan hadn't taken the initiative to contact him during this time. Actually, Luonan's personal wristband, xianxia, and other electronic communication devices were all placed in the underground laboratory of gear on the north bank. He could only sense and remotely control them through the external neuron and the soul cloak. In this way, even if he were to call someone, his location could only be set at Xia City. Of course, ever since he rode the devil ray to fly, this little trick was revealed. The general meaning was, "I'm not in Xia City, yes, but I won't say where I am." He Yuan didn't contact him under these circumstances. This reflected her respect for Luonan's actions and choices. Naturally, she had her reasons for contacting him again. He Yuan's voice was calm. She didn't have any complaints, nor did she make any gestures of concern. It was as if they met every day and were having a daily conversation. Bai Xinyan left Ban City half an hour ago. She called me on the flight. Luonan grinned as he accepted He Yuan's calm and collected good intentions. He also acted calm. She's already left. The conversation was simple, but there were many unspoken words. Bai Xinyan knew that Luonan was in Ban City, and she informed He Yuan. Perhaps she wanted to give Luonan another warning through He Yuan. But from Luonan's perspective, there was no point in hiding things at this point. He naturally treated He Yuan as someone in the know. That woman really does have a talent for snitching. Did she also leak information to the Amaterasu order? As far as I know, not yet. Really? This person's position is quite mysterious. He Yuan explained softly. Even though Bai Xinyan holds a position in Quantum Corporation, her role is similar to that of a shareholder representative. Compared to Quantum Corporation, she is quite detached. But many times her words and actions aren't the embodiment of her own will. Then kindness or malice. Which is her will? Luonan chuckled twice. Who's the shareholder behind her? Wangyu? Deep Blue Laboratory? Apocalypse Laboratory? Or could it be Li Wei, the demon from beyond? Luonan didn't say the last sentence, but his opinion of Bai Xinyan hadn't lessened in the slightest. Someone who doesn't have a fixed standpoint or someone who can't see through a standpoint can only be more dangerous. Plus, she's always playing with this sort of thing. It's mostly due to her own vile interests. Sooner or later she'll get out of it. He Yuan didn't need to clear Bai Xinyan's name. She just listened quietly. Luonan spoke to his heart's content, but a thought suddenly leaped into his mind. Sister Yuan, which side do you represent? Of course, he didn't ask this question, but truthfully speaking, He Yuan did indeed have a complicated background and was deeply connected to various interests. It just so happened that she was always able to maintain a relatively impartial position. Moreover, she maintained a tendency that made Luonan feel very at ease. This was enough. Luonan didn't want to be paranoid, so he quickly cut off this meaningless train of thought. He made a request out of habit. Sister Yuan, I want information on the Deep Blue world. Try to be as detailed as possible, such as the Deep Blue Laboratory and the Apocalypse Laboratory. The deeper you go, the better. If it's not easy to obtain, basic information on geography, minerals, and labor would also be fine. Also, the person in charge of the Apocalypse Laboratory is called Li Wei, right? Do you have any detailed information on him? Luonan couldn't help but single out Li Wei. He had Li gather this information, but he was limited by the Blood Flame Order's channels. The information was superficial, and he wasn't too satisfied with it. He Yuan was silent for a moment before responding. There are some confidential information that I'm not suited to provide. However, I will transmit some basic information and the corresponding catalog of information. If there's anything that you're particularly interested in, Mr. Luo, you can make an application to the government. This is because right now a portion of the information is gradually being declassified. And your relevant privileges have been rising rapidly recently. Under normal circumstances, the Star Alliance Committee won't refuse you. Luonan was shocked. There's such a move? Because we have to go through the process, the speed will be a bit slower. The other side will certainly get the information if we look over here. That doesn't matter. In any case, the entire world knows that we're not on good terms. Luonan admired He Yuan's ability to handle matters well without stepping out of the circle. He rubbed his palms together for a time, waiting to dig up Li Wei's foundation. Fine, he probably wouldn't be able to dig up Li Wei's foundation, but it would be good to clear away a layer of dirt. Yuan asked him something at this time. How will Mr. Luo go to the jadeite light auction? The devil ray isn't a good means of transportation. Luonan was stunned for a moment, then he laughed. Sister Yuan, you're joking with me too. Right now, there are people who are putting on airs and watching me make a fool of myself. Why would I do what they want? You're not going? Yuan was a bit surprised, but she soon felt relieved. She let out a sigh of relief. It's best if you don't go. I'm going. Why wouldn't I go? She clearly paused for a moment before continuing. What plans does Mr. Luo have? Chapter 835. Luonan thought that if he understood the actions of Her Majesty Empress Wu and the Xia city branch as him standing on the field to support them, wouldn't he be a bit too presumptuous? He wanted to say something, but he felt that it was hard to express himself. In the end, he just responded, I really can't decide on my side for now. Yuan wasn't surprised at all. It doesn't matter. Just let me know before 9 o'clock in the morning. Luonan let out a breath. Thank you, Sister Yuan. Also thank Her Majesty Empress Wu, President Ouyang, and the others on my behalf. Luonan asked Yuan about the recent situation in Xia City, then he ended the call. Then he sighed. The most willful time seemed to have passed. He needed to collect his thoughts. He couldn't be as unpredictable as Bai Xinyan. Speaking of which, that woman was clearly very smart. Why did she jump around so happily when it came to offending him? Oh, wait a moment. If this woman left. It didn't seem to be that simple. Luonan suddenly thought of something. He walked to the door and opened it. Sure enough, he saw Old Hand on the phone in the corridor outside. He was arranging the gathering of raw materials for the exoskeleton. Old Hand quickly hung up the phone when he saw Luonan open the door. He walked over and asked, Mr. Mo, do you have any other orders? Luonan thought for a moment and said, Master Shou, you guys will have to work a bit harder during this period of time. Do the preparatory work well. Once the final technological process is confirmed, we need to see the finished product as soon as possible. Of course. Also, Luonan felt that it wasn't too appropriate halfway through his words. He forcefully swallowed the latter half of his words back down. Old Hand misunderstood his meaning. He patted his chest and said, Our group of people is absolutely trustworthy when it comes to scheduling orders and working deadlines. We won't be disturbed by other things. I've always told the children that back in the wilderness, they needed to finish the work in their hands first even if they were to be stabbed outside. I've beaten them out of it long ago. Besides, Secretary Yin has helped us quite a bit these past 2 days. As long as Mr. Mo's conditions don't change, we'll just be wasting time with the Great Zay Order. We have several hundred people on our side. All of us are of one mind. You can be at ease. Old Hand spoke heroically, but he was actually probing Luonan a step further. Of course Luonan wanted to calm his mind. He didn't want to give him any other pressure. So he laughed and said, I naturally trust you, Master. We also urgently want to make this deal happen. How about this? I'll ask Secretary Yin to arrange a time to invite the President out for a serious discussion in the next 2 days. This is good. Although Mr. Mo didn't give a definite promise, his positive attitude was enough to satisfy the veteran. Of course, it was mostly because of Mr. Mo's magnanimous attitude during the cooperation process. That set of extremely valuable exoskeleton design plan and processing technology was taken out without any concealment. For a veteran, who was still a technician in his bones, this could show his character more than anything else. When the veteran left, his mood was completely different from when he first arrived. Luonan was quite happy to see Luonan's mood lift. But the more it was like this, the more he needed to follow up and deal with this matter. He returned to the house and sat behind the workbench. He rested his chin on his hand and pondered for a long time. Finally, he made up his mind and extended his consciousness. Where is the process at? Inside the warehouse at the passenger terminal. Captain Jimmy rushed back after receiving the news. He was still wearing a bright shirt and beach pants. He wore wooden clogs on his feet. He was completely out of tune with the atmosphere of the temporary command center, but his mentality was more positive and urgent than anyone else here. The intelligence clerk responded, according to Captain's intentions, the operation has already been submitted. Due to the lack of a supervisor in Ban City, it has already been sent to the East Asia Affairs Department. Get to the point. The intelligence clerk jumped in fright. His speed of speech instantly doubled. The Affairs Department has already approved it. 3 out of the 5 people in the process have already signed. Only the opinions of the director and the former supervisor are left. The deputy next to him frowned when he heard this. Captain, if this is the case, then wouldn't it fall into the hands of Manager Bai? Captain Jimmy was quite certain. Since she has left Ban City, she has separated herself from the concrete affairs. How could she have the face to compete with me, a first-line supervisor? I endured for 3 days before I sent this application. I'm already giving her enough face. Her attitude, to put it bluntly, shows that she is unwilling to take risks. Now that she has already left, what is there to fear? Besides, the others have already signed, but she is still making excuses. I have to suspect that among the group of people we want to arrest, there might be some gigolos that she is keeping behind others' backs. Captain Jimmy tore off his open-chest floral shirt. Everyone get to your positions. Let's try to settle this matter by tonight. We have been delayed in Ban City for too long. The deep roar of the engine sounded as the giant armored airship shuttled through the vast clouds. With its huge size alone, it could deter a limited number of mutant birds living in the stratosphere and provide them with basic peace. At present, intercontinental civil aviation flights were increasingly using this type of vehicle, which was far larger and safer than large passenger planes, to defend against the threat of flying mutants. Apart from being slightly slower, there were almost no shortcomings. Of course, in the eyes of certain people, the result of the loss of efficiency was also very bad, so much so that they once again complained, the business strategy of the airline companies is becoming more and more conservative. In this way, the military's progress in the wilderness has become untrustworthy. In the first-class cabin, on an independent seat that resembled a capsule space capsule, Yukawa Isuk was half reclining and half leaning back. His posture was lazy, which was rare in Ban City, and he only read the news to pass the time of the long journey. He had just finished reading a report about a military operation in the wilderness and casually linked two unrelated matters together. The main reason was that he hoped that Bai Xinyan, who was separated by the isle, would join in the process of idle conversation. Bai Xinyan gave him face, raised her eyelids and glanced at him. I remember that this is a business under your name? So I have been working to promote the development of high-end aerospace business. There will be mutants in the stratosphere and there will also be a few at the bottom of the thermosphere, but above 100 kilometers, it is still pure and safe. With the support of technology, I trust the environment there more. The corner of Bai Xinyan's mouth curled up. Sounds like a platform for your special aerospace medal. Yukawa Isuk laughed. No, I just feel sorry for not being able to show off the outstanding performance of my private spacecraft. Miss Xinyan, I still think that you should accept my invitation and go to the venue in a more efficient way. Compared to efficiency, safety is more important. I said, traveling with thousands of people, this sense of security is more to my liking. Yukawa Isuk glanced at the few figures in the first-class cabin. Forgive me, in a place like this, it is really difficult to understand the feeling of traveling with thousands of people. When there is an accident, you will feel it. Not only Yukawa Isuk, but also the other passengers in the surrounding seats were surprised by this. Bai Xinyan, however, did not care at all. She immediately turned her gaze back to the projection area in front of her, supporting her cheek with her hand. Yukawa Isuk looked at Bai Xinyan's side profile, slightly lost in thought. Fortunately, his rationality quickly won over him. He looked over and saw a few words in the virtual work area, unable to hide his curiosity. That arrest order again? Chapter 836. Yukawa Isuk's eyes and ears were extremely well informed in the secular world of Ban City and most of the inner world. I heard that it involves a few hundred people from a certain Hengduan tribe. It's a little troublesome to deal with, but as long as the military and police cooperate well, it's not a big deal. Bai Xinyan answered lazily, is that so? Yukawa Isuk felt that there was more to this than met the eye. You suppressed the xianxia operation team and didn't let them test your sword. Other than offending people, there's no benefit to it. This doesn't seem like your usual style. My usual style? Bai Xinyan glanced at him again. Looks like you know me better. Have we slept together before? Yukawa Isuk was captivated by Bai Xinyan's gaze. He didn't feel it, but he felt like his chest had been hammered and he couldn't speak for a moment. There was no way to continue this conversation. When he thought about it again after knowing her for so many years, he really didn't understand Bai Xinyan's usual style. This woman's actions were too temperamental. That was not the right word to describe it. It was more appropriate to say that most of the time, it was impossible to tell whether Bai Xinyan was happy or angry, and the situation had already deviated in an unbelievable direction. Of course, Yukawa Isuk also knew that most of the time Bai Xinyan did not have a choice. Some of the things she did were not of her own will, and she suffered on behalf of others. However, his ability and willpower to carry out all kinds of orders to the end without even blinking was also intimidating. Therefore in the circle some people called her black-hearted salt, and some even called her unscrupulous spokesperson, mocking her for being a puppet placed in front of others by powerful people, and saying that one had to be prepared to be betrayed at any time. I must be crazy, why did I want to come out with her? In fact, Yukawa Isuk understood. He gave up his comfortable private spacecraft and decided to take a civil flight with Bai Xinyan at the last minute. To put it bluntly, it was to get out of the circle of trouble in Ban City as soon as possible. It was sad to say that Ban City was his home base, but now he was running away from it as if he was fleeing from a disaster. It was an abyss of suffering, and even as the head of the Yukawa family he couldn't bear it. As the saying went, it was easy to invite a god but hard to send him away. He had invited the two gods from the Amaterasu cult and enjoyed the convenience they brought, so he had to bear the price. In other words, he had come uninvited. Yukawa Isuk sighed unconsciously. At the same time he clearly heard Bai Xinyan sigh from the other side of the aisle as well. The two sighs were strangely synchronized. Oh, this is rare. It wasn't that he sighed at the coincidence of the timing, but rather that Bai Xinyan rarely showed her emotions. He had just said that this woman was simply a cold-blooded execution machine. What was she doing now? Without waiting for Yukawa Isuk to ask, Bai Xinyan said softly, "Isuk, I heard you have a lot of women outside. Are we that close?" The corner of Yukawa's mouth twitched. He really wanted to do what Bai Xinyan had done just now and fight back. But the reason he provoked Bai Xinyan in the first place was because he wanted to chat with her to relieve his boredom. Then he thought about the 20-hour-long flight ahead and decided to be magnanimous. "Yes, I'm ashamed that I don't have a good grasp of such relationships." As he spoke, Yukawa Isuk glanced at her from the corner of his eye, trying to figure out what this woman was up to. "Do you usually use them to entertain guests?" Hey. You're not going to be unreasonable about this, are you? Ahem, if you want to use this standard to judge me and consider the future of our relationship, I will be very disappointed. The topic was a little wild, but Yukawa Isuk was not a fledgling. To put it bluntly, they were just teasing each other. As a man he could accept such an atmosphere. However, Bai Xinyan's expression looked like she was discussing a very serious topic. Even though Yukawa Isuk did not confirm it, she continued to speak according to the established inference. "Now there is such a poor person. She followed your instructions to entertain guests and asked for something from them. But the guests found out and it caused some trouble. Faced with the anger of the guests, what would you do, Mr. Yukawa?" "Oh, you don't have to answer that. Let's move on to the next question. If Mr. Yukawa was even more unlucky and reincarnated as this woman, faced with such a situation, what would you think? What would you do?" Yukawa Isuk let out a ha, but did not say anything else. Bai Xinyan smiled and did not look at the other's expression. She extended her finger, verified her authority in the virtual workspace, and prepared to sign the application. "Yasorno this time?" "The answer is already there." Bai Xinyan was halfway through her sentence, but the rest of her words were strangely stuck in her throat. Her finger, which was already in the projection area, froze. She tilted her head slightly, trying to look across the aisle to the opposite side. However, before she could react, the voice from the other side sounded again. "Before making a decision, it's never wrong to consider the consequences." Bai Xinyan's finger, which was in the projection area, subconsciously curled back halfway. "You could have lived a good life, but you insisted on creating an irreconcilable situation. The way you people think is really strange." It was still Yukawa Isuk's voice, but his words were full of admonishment and regret. There was a subtle difference from before. And that tone and speed of speech, especially the resentful and distressed tone at the end. Bai Xinyan finally aimed her gaze at the target, and what she saw was still Yukawa Isuk's face. But on this face, the lower half of the mouth opened and closed, the lingering sound lingering. The upper half, especially around the eyes, eye sockets, was tight and twisted, almost bursting from the bulging eyeballs. Inside, there was an unstoppable sense of confusion and fear. Bai Xinyan was a little dazed. She looked at Yukawa Isuk on the other side of the aisle. She looked at this powerful figure who could make half of Osaka shake with a stomp of his foot. He raised his right hand in an extremely stiff posture. It was as if there were invisible ropes tied around his arm. Every movement was like a bondage and pain. It took Yukawa Isuk a full 5 seconds to place his palm on the front of his face and press it down. Bai Xinyan could already confirm that he wanted to cover his mouth, to seal his lips, teeth and tongue, which were completely out of his control. There was no doubt that this was an extremely stupid move that would not work. But when a person suddenly lost control of a part of their body, they could only watch helplessly as they became someone else's mouthpiece. No one could say that their reaction at this moment was more sensible than Yukawa Isuk's. With a loud slap, the palm finally landed on Yukawa Isuk's forehead. It sealed his eyes, almost flattened his nose, but it still could not stop the mouth that was out of control. Yukawa Isuk still spoke in a fluent voice. The method might be a little rough. I originally wanted to have a more private conversation and discuss it, but everyone's defenses are different. Bai Xinyan's mind suddenly flashed. She suddenly stood up and shouted at Yukawa Isuk, who was still sealed by the palm and twisted face. Calm down, he can't completely control you. Chapter 837. Most of the people here were reputable people in Osaka's circle. Of course, there were some who knew Yukawa Isuk and wanted to ask about it. Currently, other than the two people involved, the others only thought that there was an argument. On the other side, the air stewardess tried to rush to the scene, but soon, a few burly bodyguards had already overtaken her and surrounded Bai Xinyan and Yukawa Isuk. Mr. Isuk, you, the head of the Yukawa family's bodyguards, Kitano Sukito, rushed to the front and wanted to ask what was going on, but when he saw, Lord of Stars, Chapter 516, Upgraded, Part 1, please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. Chapter 838. Kitano Sukito's reaction was very fast. The chain of clues was also very complete. However, there wasn't much of a difference between ability users and ordinary people when it came to the level of imagination. If he could think of it, then the few important people in the first-class cabin who knew the relevant information would also be able to think of it. Infrasonic wave array. The person who called out with a trembling voice was quite obvious. The person who called out wasn't brave enough. His voice was trembling and his legs were trembling. He lost his balance and nearly fell to the ground. Fortunately, someone supported him from behind, but it still caused a commotion. Kitano Sukito swept his gaze over and recognized the identity of the person who spoke. He was a senior official of a certain department of the Sakura government. He was a well-known figure among the important people in the first-class cabin. At the very least, his words were easy to believe. Maekawa, this idiot! Kitano Sukito cried out in his mind. The people present might not know about the cage master, but the infrasonic wave array was a standard part of the city's defense. The degree of perception and understanding of it instantly increased. People couldn't help but think. Why did the Maekawa official say infrasonic wave array? Why did he have this kind of reaction? Everyone was on an airship tens of thousands of meters high in the sky. This was the information age. Even vague fragments of information could be found online. If the information couldn't be found online, they could still ask. Which of these people in the first-class cabin didn't have relatives or friends in key positions? The first-class cabin was instantly enveloped in a chaotic and extremely negative atmosphere. Phone calls were made one by one. Even if not everyone could obtain the complete information, they could still communicate with each other. A rough outline would be pieced together sooner or later. Kitano Sukito's head split into two. From his understanding of the mental side, since Luonan used negative emotions to invade Yukawa Isuk, then it was very likely that Luonan used the emotions of other people to carry out his plan. Wouldn't this situation be like a fish in water? Kitano Sukito took a deep breath. He used his own face to assume an even fiercer posture. Mr. Maekawa and everyone else, please calm down. Return to your seats right now. We have the situation under control. At the very least, there were no visible intruders at the level of this group of people. No matter what you guys did to Mr. Yukawa, it has nothing to do with us. Kitano Sutoto almost punched this random person out of the airship. Fortunately, there were still some smart people here. The guy who had just said something stupid was immediately stopped, and the vice minister of Maekawa, who had exposed the dangerous situation earlier, was pushed to the front with a bitter face. We need to be treated humanely. The situation we're facing right now is not something we want to see. We did not interfere in the grudge between Mr. Xuanhuan and Cage Master Teacher, and we do not wish to do so now. We're innocent, thousands of innocent passengers. This senior bureaucrat was quite good at handling his emotions very well. His trembling voice and body were rather contagious. So much so that two ladies started to cry. Well said. This guy who took the citizen's tax and sat in first class wasn't completely useless after all. This was one of the most appropriate negotiation methods that Kitano Satoto could think of. Although the cage master often took out the infrasonic wave array and swung it around, he only pulled the trigger once and the range was controlled. As long as they could stop this killer weapon, they would have a chance to catch their breath and even counterattack. Thinking of this, Kitano Satoto's gaze turned to Xianhui, who was sitting on the back of the mountain. Xianhui was holding the magatama tightly in his hand, and a faint light seeped through the gaps between his fingers. Was it useful? Kitano Satoto really wanted to ask this question, but Xianhui didn't respond. Yukawa Isuk, who was firmly restrained in his seat, turned his gaze over and sighed, "I'm clearly the victim." Kitano Satoto's face was dark and he didn't make a sound. Luckily, the vice minister of Maikawa had already gotten into character. He took the initiative to say, "Mr. Luonan, no Mr. Luonan, please consider the innocent passengers on the airship. Thousands of people, thousands of families. If anything happens, it will be an irreversible tragedy." Yes, it really is a tragedy. Yukawa Isuk's face revealed a huge, strange smile. "Actually, if it weren't for you guys messing around here, I would have already said goodbye and left. Mr. Scallop, are you done messing around?" Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Everyone's gazes focused on the face of Xianhui, who had been silent for a long time. But before they could ask anything, a bright light lit up in front of their eyes. It was so piercing that everyone subconsciously averted their gazes and shielded their eyes. Yukawa Isuk, who was forcefully restrained, also narrowed his eyes. But soon he instinctively opened them, allowing the strong light to penetrate his pupils. Tears flowed from his eyes and his body trembled. Actually, this light was good for him. The light on the material plane was projected onto the mental plane, and it turned into a dazzling sun. The heat emitted by this sun was quite compatible with Yukawa Isuk's mental structure. Everywhere the light went, there was a subtle and clear response. This way, the intruder from the outside world would naturally be exposed. Indeed, the intruder Luonan was partially exposed to the sunlight. In fact, if it was a simple and crude invasion from the outside, this magatama would have automatically reacted and repelled it. There was no need for Xianhui, who was on the back of the mountain, to stimulate it with external power. But that kind of spontaneous reaction would not be as strong as it was now, and it would have a considerable follow-up power. That's it. The corner of Yukawa Isuk's mouth twitched slightly, showing that the magatama's counterattack was somewhat effective. Luonan's degree of control over Yukawa Isuk was somewhat reduced, and he really did not plan on exerting his strength a second time. "Don't even think about running." The unyielding voice came from Xianhui, who was on the back of the mountain. After the magatama's power was completely stimulated, Xianhui's small body seemed to have expanded by a size. His face was bright, and his facial features and 7 orifices were all connected to the magatama's light. This was the case on the material plane. On the mental plane, the special symbolic sun, under the blessing of Xianhui, produced even more changes. It activated certain factors within Yukawa Isuk's frame, causing it to sprout and rapidly grow into an invisible thicket of intertwining branches and leaves. The thicket could sense the changes inside and outside, and it locked onto the completely different nature of the intruder. Its roots and leaves continued to grow like long ropes of chains, in an attempt to bind and imprison the intruder. The changes in configuration are really beautiful. The image is also very unified. Yukawa Isuk sighed in admiration. Is this a simplified version of the Fusang Purewood? On the other side, Bai Xinyan suddenly asked, "Are you from the Amaterasu order?" The person she was asking was naturally Xianhui, who was on the back of the mountain. The latter, who was controlling the magatama, did not respond immediately. Instead, Kitano Sukito explained, "Yamato was born in a family of Onmyoji masters. He later became a disciple of the Pope." In the time it took to say these 2 sentences, Yamato Xianhui had a better grasp of the situation. He interrupted Kitano Sukito with a clear voice, "I will lock onto the intruder's position and immediately contact the radar or satellite positioning system. He can't be too far away from here." Bai Xinyan frowned while Kitano Sukito's eyes lit up. In fact, he had a belly full of anger right now. If he could find Luonan's position and Luonan had a missile launch button in his hand, he would press it without hesitation. "Don't complicate things." Bai Xinyan hesitated for a moment before advising Kitano Sukito, "He's already retreating. This is just a warning." Just. Kitano Sukito's eyes were as sharp as knives. "Miss Bai Xinyan, the Yukawa family respects your opinion, but we hope that you can respect our profession. If that person can come once, then he can come a second time and a third time. You guys can't do anything to him. In the vast Pacific Ocean at an altitude of 10,000 meters, how were a bunch of ordinary people going to deal with the powerful ability users who were riding the flying devil rays that were several times faster than the speed of sound when they were riding on civilian airships that seemed stable but lacked countermeasures? You guys can't do anything, but that doesn't mean that the order can't. Mountainback Xiaohui responded. He turned his head and used a cold and arrogant gaze to cut across Bai Xinyan's face. Unrelated people, please keep your distance. Don't interfere with my casting. At this moment, Mountainback Xiaohui naturally became the person in charge. Even Kitano Sukido had to give in to him a bit. Because at this moment, Mountainback Xiaohui was no longer just an external bodyguard. He represented the stance of the Order of Amaterasu. Bai Xinyan raised her eyebrows. Your Yukawa family is willing to be the bait. Kitano Sukido's expression was very ugly. As the head bodyguard, he felt that his authority had been violated. But it was useless to say anything now. Mountainback Xiaohui's mouth was already flowing with a mysterious and incomprehensible incantation. The incantation buzzed in the half-sealed space. Yukawa Aishuk was still squirming with his crooked and twitching mouth. He complained, "Why do you keep looking up? The Order of Justice doesn't do this. Is this the difference between the Order of Ideals and the Order of Gods?" Some of the people present understood these words, some did not, and some pretended not to understand. In short, no one responded. Kitano Sukido and the group of bodyguards stared at Yukawa Aishuk's body. Xiaohui continued to chant his incantation, while Bai Xinyan continued to retreat quietly. At this moment, Yukawa Aishuk's eyes followed her and locked onto her position. He transmitted the attention and pressure hidden behind the layers of clouds and the void. Maybe everyone should be open and honest for once. Soldiers are soldiers, generals are generals. Even if we can't negotiate, we can still fight. My words may be a little childish, but it's really boring for you to keep knocking on my door like this. Bai Xinyan had a bitter smile on her face, but she had already made up her mind not to speak. She had a strong premonition that the less she spoke now, the less trouble she would have in the future. If she could survive this escalating situation. Seeing that Bai Xinyan was refusing to cooperate, the other side looked a little depressed. Forget it. Maybe I shouldn't have come today. I'll find a more suitable method next time. Chapter 839. The one who spoke was Xiaohui. This was the second time he had emphasized it. It carried an unquestionable might. At this moment, Xiaohui, who was on the mountain's back, was holding the glowing Magatama. His heart was more or less burning. It was for his own luck and for the power he was in control of at this moment. The situation in front of him, the time, the place, and the form were all unexpected. But the situation itself, which was Luonan's revenge against Yukawa Aishuk, was foretold by the Pope when he sent Luonan to be Yukawa Aishuk's bodyguard. Therefore Xiaohui was very confident. He calmly stimulated the Magatama's power and fused it with it. At this moment, his perception became the tip of the Fusang divine tree's roots that pierced through the endless void. He projected everything that was happening in front of him, waiting for the response from the highest level and receiving the incoming godly power. During this time, just the fine tentacles at the end of the root had already unfolded into an intricate and magnificent scroll in front of him. The exquisite uses of the high-end power were presented in an inconceivable geometrical structure and an even more exquisite and microscopic mode of energy usage. The cage master called it a configuration. How appropriate. But how does it feel to be trapped by a configuration? Xiaohui's mental plane was momentarily dazed. This was the unavoidable result of receiving the high-end power. But he was very experienced in this aspect. He quickly gathered his consciousness and calmed his mind to avoid any negative effects. He also had to be careful of the cage master's unpredictable mental invasion. His performance seemed fierce, but every step he took was solid. This was one of the most important reasons why the Pope valued him. Right now he was in the middle of passing and waiting. It was also at this moment that Xiaohui saw Yukawa Aishuk, whose mouth was crooked due to the interference of the Magatama's power. He struggled to move his lips and speak again. It seems that the two in Ban City really have nothing to do with you. Then pass. We will use the elimination method and try a few more times. In the end you won't be able to hide it. What a loathsome, arrogant and conceited fellow. After the initial "so beautiful" comment, the person behind Yukawa Aishuk no longer paid attention to the configuration scroll on the mental plane. He just stared at Bai Xinyan and said some words that he didn't really understand. On the back of the mountain, Xiaohui was infuriated. It was fine if they ignored him, but in front of the grand structure of the great divine treasure of the Fusang divine tree, no one in this world could display such an attitude. I told you there won't be a next time. It was a little deliberate to emphasize it for the third time, but Xiaohui was not doing it for his own character. He was doing it for the respect that the two lords of Amaterasu deserved. I've got you. You use a lot of exclamations. What? This sudden sentence caused Xiaohui's thoughts and emotions to stagnate. He was, after all, a Class B mind master and he was very sensitive to the relevant fields. With this reminder, he did not let himself be led around by the nose. Instead, he suddenly realized a crucial point. Wasn't the feedback from the propping mulberry tree's great divine treasure a little too slow? It was also at this moment that Yukawa Aishuk, with his crooked mouth and slanted eyes, revealed a horrifying smile. That Pope of Baji didn't teach you seriously. Such a complicated configuration. You know how it works but you don't know why. How can you succeed? Under the effect of the Magatama's power, Yukawa Aishuk gradually lost control over the structure of Yukawa Aishuk's body and soul. But the muffled voice in his throat was like a highly viscous acid. It sprayed out and adhered to Xiaohui's face and soul, burning and penetrating. There were two waves of pain. The first wave was the pain of being pierced in the deepest and most private corner of one's heart. The other wave was the unique sense of danger that came from the mind. Oh no, I've been hit. Without giving Xiaohui a chance to analyze it in depth, in the spiritual plane that he saw and sensed, the exquisite composition that had been unfurled actually began to slowly roll back. It was retracted. Xiaohui's eyeballs nearly bulged out of their sockets like Yukawa Aishuk's. His consciousness played no role at all. In fact, it was just as Luonan said. The Pope of Baji gave Xiaohui the method to stimulate and maintain the Magatama's power, but she did not give him the method to use it flexibly. The Pope of Baji did not go so far as to be selfish. It was mainly because Xiaohui had not reached that level. He did not possess the knowledge reserves. Every structure, every section, and every detail of such a complex structure would affect the entire structure. Xiaohui, who was on the back of the mountain, was able to maintain the stability of the whole structure and successfully act as a fulcrum to sense and feedback information. He was already worthy of the role the church had given him. But this kind of role was not enough in the face of the orderly retraction of the configuration before his eyes. Spilled water was hard to retrieve, but everything that appeared on the mental plane was simply like reversing time. The power of the Fusang divine tree that had already unfurled was retracted bit by bit. Came back the way it came. There was not a trace of error, not a bit of wastage. But even on the mental plane, the circulation of energy had to obey basic laws. How could entropy increase and entropy decrease consume the same amount of energy? The most terrifying expenditure of the effect of reversing time was the astronomical calculation of the law. It consumed Luonan's brain power and control. He did it if he wanted to. But the remaining portion was completely squeezed back into the power of the Magatama, and this power was suppressed back to its original state. Xiaohui and the Magatama were affected by the entire activation mechanism. To a certain degree they were one entity. There was no need to consider the boundaries of the reverse retraction. The retraction of the Magatama's power took advantage of the situation and pushed Xiaohui back in time. Of course, this was an exaggeration. His mental state and mind were completely unprepared for the retraction of the Magatama's power. His entire body was crushed to the point of suffocation. His swollen body instantly deflated. Xiaohui's body looked like it had its bones pulled out. He fell limply to the ground, unconscious. Phew. That was close. Yukawa Aishuk sighed as he looked at Xiaohui, who was on the back of the mountain. I almost got myself into big trouble. Fortunately, Luonan had fought with the propping mulberry tree system of the Amaterasu cult many times over the past few days. He had seen the brain demon, the horn demon, the fat dragon, and many other similar tricks. Only then was he able to come up with this method of reverse sealing. Of course, this was also because he saw the opportunity quickly and made use of his understanding of the configuration of the great divine treasure of the Fusang divine tree. He also made use of the opportunity when Xiaohui was controlling the Magatama on the back of the mountain and had no time to pay attention to anything else. He took the first step to induce his negative emotions, giving him illusions and misleading him, distorting the feedback of the entire sensory channel. Just this skill alone was enough to prove that he hadn't been communicating with Mr. Bai for half a year. But the more it was like this, the harder it was for Luonan to deal a heavy blow to Bai Xinyan. He didn't have much hope that the previous threats would achieve anything. Also, sealing off the mountain back of Xiaohui might not solve the problem once and for all. Perhaps choosing to come here today was a mistake in itself. Luo Nan brought Yukawa Aishuk to Sai, breaking the deathly silence in the first-class cabin. He was still the center of attention. Everyone's gazes were filled with fear, bewilderment, and ignorance. At least at this very moment, every single one of them had basically lost the will and confidence to control their own lives. In reality, their fates of life and death depended on Luo Nan's will. It depended on a single thought. This included Kitano Sakuto, who had clenched his fists but couldn't find a target to exert his strength on. This head bodyguard stared blankly at Xiaohui on the back of the mountain. He looked at his temporary partner. Xiaohui held the magatama that was no longer glowing. Xiaohui curled up on the ground. Xiaohui's aura was completely restrained and sealed. It was as if Xiaohui had been sealed into an invisible container. The connection between the inside and the outside was completely severed. This wasn't a knockdown or an extermination. This was a seal. In a way that he couldn't understand at all, this was a B-rank psychic. Kitano Sakuto didn't know what he was feeling right now. He turned to look at his employer and tried to converse with the soul deep within the frame of his body and soul. Don't go too far. The words squeezed out from his throat proved that this head bodyguard was completely at his wit's end. Was it too far? Of course, Luo Nan knew that Yukawa Aishuk's 7 orifices were bleeding. If it wasn't for the support of his will, Yukawa Aishuk's situation would have been even worse than Xiaohui on the ground. Luo Nan had forcefully reversed the structure of the Fusang tree just now, causing the power that Luo Nan transmitted to him to be a bit excessive. With the strength of Yukawa Aishuk's frame of body and soul, this wave of power was enough to cause serious injuries. But Luo Nan wasn't going to feel apologetic. If Yukawa Aishuk knew the role he should play in this world and stayed in his position, he might be able to live for a few more years. Under the influence of Luo Nan's will, Yukawa Aishuk's bloodshot and murky eyes adjusted slightly. He stared at Kitano Sakuto without saying a word. Kitano Sakuto's fleshy face twitched a few times. The ominous glint in his eyes finally dimmed. He waved his hand weakly. The 2 bodyguards who had been restraining Yukawa Aishuk's body were now stiff. They stared at their boss with wide eyes. When they saw the gesture, they felt as if they had been granted amnesty and quickly backed away. One of them even tripped over Xiaohui, who was on the ground, and almost fell down. Yukawa Aishuk slowly got up amidst this bewildered atmosphere. He bowed slightly to the people in the first-class cabin. Let's call it a day. My abrupt visit has caused inconvenience to everyone. Please forgive me. No. Please don't mind it. The Maikawa undersecretary made an example of himself. He bowed 90 degrees to Yukawa Aishuk. Please don't mind the dishonorable role I played in this incident. Yeah. Please don't mind it. You're too kind. I don't want to die. The first-class cabin was a boiling cauldron of voices. While everyone was expressing their stance or venting their emotions, Yukawa Aishuk's bloody and swollen face turned to the back. It was the entrance to the first-class cabin. Sir, you can't do this. You can't go up. The air stewardess's voice was urgent and trembling. It was rare for her to fulfill her duty, but it was pointless. The sealed partition door opened. A middle-aged man dressed in a suit and leather shoes walked in. He looked like a business elite. The man's face was flushed red. His feet were a bit floaty. It was as if he was drunk. However, his eyes were very bright. When he cast his gaze, it was as if the sun was shining down from the sky. Chapter 840. The drunk business elite pushed himself up from the VIP seat and moved over step by step. His fluttering footsteps and exceptionally bright eyes were completely different from normal, but he naturally formed an inexplicable harmony with the other abnormal creature on this side. At the same time, he also separated the other relatively normal fellows from him. It was this kind of situation that reduced the difficulty of understanding Yukawa Aishuk's nagging and complaints. A smart person like the Maeda Vice Officer of Affairs instinctively discovered the conflicting and uneasy factors. But he couldn't retract his prawn-like body for a while. He awkwardly froze there. What was even worse was that Yukawa Aishuk and the others were in the middle of the first-class cabin. The drunkard who came up later had to pass by a group of people if he wanted to get there. This included the Maeda Vice Officer of Affairs. The drunkard didn't give the Maeda Vice Officer of Affairs a chance to think deeply before he passed by. He even said, "Excuse me." A surprisingly dry and hot palm pressed down on the former Vice Secretary of Affairs' head. borrowing a little strength to continue moving forward. As for the former Vice Secretary of Affairs, he had turned from a bent prawn into cooked prawn meat. His entire body was paralyzed on the ground and he had lost consciousness. The sudden collapse of the Mayeta Vice Officer of Affairs didn't cause panic among the people around him. In fact, as these two extraordinary people gradually approached each other, any strange situation seemed to be within reason. Moreover, the drunkard was still talking, attracting most of the attention. My job is not up to standard. The number of devout believers is limited, and the ability users are even more scarce. Losing even one is a loss. Your drastic measures are very beautiful, but they are also giving me a difficult problem. His tone and wording were ordinary. Only the content of his words required others to think carefully. But even a person with a brain ischemia could understand at this time that another big shot had arrived. Wuxialover stood next to his seat. He stared at the newcomer and didn't say anything. He just sighed. On the other side, Xianxia glanced at the unconscious mountain-back xianhui on the ground. She didn't know the details of the drastic measures, but she could tell from common sense that the most suitable target for the new big shot soul wasn't a business elite coming from business class. It was xianhui on the mountain-back. These twists and turns only served to confirm that Luonan's methods were brilliant, and he possessed considerable foresight. Of course, if this big shot wanted to come over, it was impossible to stop him. At most, it would just be a few more unlucky people. The drunkard said something that seemed to be clear, but it wasn't. Then he wandered off. It was not until then that the personal secretary of the Mythicalworld Vice Minister of Affairs had the courage to help his superior. But at this moment, he only lifted up a sleeve and half of the Vice Secretary of State Affairs, who was lying on the ground. The skin and flesh under the clothes seemed to have been put through several fires in a steamer, and the inside was almost melted. Ah! The sharp sound of the broken strings of reason turned into a screech of pain that came out of the secretary's throat. The future senior political official, who graduated from a first-class university, worked in a first-class department and received first-class training, immediately peed his pants. His body bounced up a few centimeters and fell on the corpse of the vice minister of Mythicalworld. He lost consciousness. The screams, the strange smell, and the disfigured corpse. The sensory stimulation that came together and exploded in an instant finally tore apart the numb atmosphere caused by the high tension. No matter how strange the previous events were, they were far from being able to compare to the impact of the horror of death right before their eyes. The first-class cabin was in chaos. Almost everyone was retreating, fleeing, and running as far as they could. The relatively spacious first-class cabin was filled with a dozen headless flies. In other words, they could be ignored if they wanted to. After the drunkard touched the Mythicalworld Vice Minister of Affairs, he did not touch anyone else. It was as if the drunkard was just an accident. The drunkard smoothly made his way to the periphery of the small circle around Wuxialover. Most of the people in this circle were bodyguards. They were all professionals. They saw how this drunkard deprived the Mythicalworld Vice Minister of Affairs of his life, and now he was right in front of them. The more they understood the inconceivable things, the more they understood how terrifying this person, or the consciousness that was parasitic on this person's body, was. They also wanted to escape, but their leader, Kitano Sweto, did not respond. They hesitated and lost the chance to escape. They could only desperately shrink their bodies and try to put as much distance as possible between them and the drunkard. In this way, Wuxialover's protective wall was as good as non-existent. As the head of the bodyguards, Kitano Sweto still did not respond. In fact, he was probably one of the most dumbfounded people in the first-class cabin. When the drunkard was less than 2 meters away from him, he could already feel the abnormally high temperature. Only then did he wake up from his dream. He hurriedly and cautiously bowed. It's you? Kitano Sukito wasn't tall to begin with, and his bow made him even shorter. Therefore, the drunkard naturally ignored him, but his footsteps that had been moving forward also stopped there. There was no response from the other side. Kitano Sweto did not even dare to move his bent body. Not only him, but the people around him who had been influenced by what he saw and heard also instinctively bowed, each more obedient and humble than the last. There was also Xianxia. She also bowed, her eyebrows drooping, and naturally held her breath. Outside the cabin, there was chaos as if a bomb had gone off, but inside the cabin, everyone was as silent as cicadas in winter. Between these two completely different scenes, the only similarity was probably the huge tension created by terror and absurdity, and the heart-wrenching pain that tore at people's hearts. Amidst the implicit and explicit agitation that tore at his heart, the drunkard spoke again. His tone was still very flat, but the information that came out of his mouth was like a flame that had finally burned through a curtain. It was a hot stream that rushed at his face. I am Hyaki. Kitano Sueto by Xinyan, and the group of bodyguards subconsciously lowered their bodies a little more to show their reverence for this title. Yukawa Aishik's mouth twitched. Hyaki. Pulp? In the entire first-class cabin, only Yukawa Aishik kept his body relatively straight. Of course, those who knew the truth knew that it was not the body that was straight, but the external soul that was supporting the body. The Pope of Hyaki, who had descended with the body of a believer, maintained a calm tone. It seemed that the slightest fluctuation could break the balance that had been maintained until now. Young man, you have a tendency to refuse communication. You are very hostile toward the Amaterasu order. The Pope of Hyaki was stating a fact. For the logic behind the fact to be established, more details needed to be filled in. This was equivalent to a kind of interrogation. So Yukawa Aishik opened his mouth to say, "Hee." Luo Nan had no intention of responding. He just used Yukawa Aishik's eyes and ears as well as a wider and richer medium, to seriously observe and perceive, and to make adjustments. He adjusted himself to the best possible state. At this time, the first-class cabin that was hit by a terror bomb had already been lucky enough to rush out. But at the same time, they allowed the destruction of the terror bomb to spread to a larger area. Not a single person in the business or economy class was spared. Even the cockpit. The captain and the others should have already known about the unforeseen event that happened in the first-class cabin. They had not reacted before, but after a few minutes of delay, their reaction suddenly affected the entire airship. This colossus high up in the sky suddenly lowered its altitude and tilted. Although it quickly returned to normal, it still caused a group of people in the first-class cabin who did not have their seatbelts fastened to be in a rather sorry state. 2 bodyguards who only cared about bowing fell to the ground. They grabbed the handrails beside them with all their might to prevent themselves from crashing into the terrifying drunkard in front of them. At this moment, their hearts were about to explode. Bai Xinyan's body swayed, but she quickly regained her balance. She glanced outside the porthole. She didn't know when, but the airship had already sunk into the hazy layer of clouds. Smoke billowed outside the porthole, mixing with the curtain of night over the Pacific Ocean. As the 2 people at the center of the incident, whether it was Yukawa Aishik or the drunkard, they were still mere mortals. They did not have the ability to take root in the swaying airship. During this period they were swaying left and right, but there was still a conversation going on between them. It was mainly the Pope of Baiji who spoke. He even changed the direction of the conversation. Your spiritual configuration design is very good, but the spiritual realm is not a safe place. The higher you build now, the harder you will fall in the future. Is that so? Yukawa Aishik replied casually. If the back of his head had not hit the outer shell of the space cabin next to him, he would have sounded more like a gentleman. The drunkard supported himself on the outer shell of the space cabin. He was barely able to maintain his image. At least his words were steady. Young people can be unscrupulous, but they should always think about the suffering in the future. As if you know anything. We can discuss and communicate. These people's original intentions were mostly the same, but they were too stupid and arrogant. Then you are cunning and sinister, right? The airship returned to normal. Most of the people in the chaotic first-class cabin were still in a state of shock. The last round of dialogue, especially the one with the Pope of Baiji, had a seriously low intake and digestion. Comparatively speaking, Luo Nan had borrowed Yukawa Aishik's mouth to reveal his emotions. They were very straightforward and easy to understand. It was very hard to accept. The other side was an extraordinary. Even though he had borrowed the power of his believers to descend in an incomplete form, his authority ranking in the inner world and the entire earth had been in the top 10 for many years. He was even in the top 5. This was especially true in the eyes of Kitano Sakudo and the other ability users who were registered in Sakura City. The Pope of Baiji and the Amaterasu order that he represented were like the vault of heaven that covered the skies above Sakura City. They were like the sun that brought about changes. Luo Nan's attitude, they could not see Luo Nan behind Yukawa Aishik, but they could see the drunkard on the other side laughing softly. Oh my, can you tell? Yeah. Sakura City is too close. Yukawa Aishik's body fell to the ground as soon as he finished speaking. At the same time, the skies above the Pacific Ocean, which was supposed to be dark in the night, suddenly flashed with a powerful light. The light didn't fall from the sky, and it was as bright as day within a radius of hundreds of kilometers. You're tuning in to the Sword Dance in the Vast Sky YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.